I would say one of the great joys of the priesthood, for me at least, is getting to preach. I'm not saying that I'm very good at it, but I just enjoy the activity of it. And part of the reason why I like it so much is that I'm ultimately revealing to you what God has done in my own heart all week long, or for however long I've been preparing for that homily. And so you get to see a little bit of what God is convicting in me as to what I say on Sunday. And always it's something that I need to hear first and foremost. So I hope that, last week as we were talking about, our goods, our treasure, I needed to hear that also. I thought about asking for hands to be raised as to who made a stop by Goodwill this week, but maybe some of you are waiting till this week for some reason, so I won't do that. It was freeing to get to stop by. I stopped by Goodwill on Thursday, and it was just freeing to kind of give that stuff away. So I'm grateful to God that He would challenge me in that way. We're kind of continuing on this weekend with last weekend. Jesus says, "Where your treasure is, there also will your heart be." Where your treasure is, there also will be your heart. I thought this weekend we might actually talk a little bit about tithing. Tithing, I learned in my first assignment that some people under the age of like 40 have never heard that word before. And so I thought we might describe it here today just so everyone can say like, oh yeah, I knew the whole time, but we know. Tithing is a Hebrew word that we hear oftentimes in the book of Leviticus and Deuteronomy and Numbers. And it's a word that means tenth. And it's the word that they used for the Jewish people of what they were to give back to the temple. So they were to give a tenth of their belongings, what they earn, back to the temple for the Levites, but also to assist the poor who came to the temple. Right, they're called to whatever that thing is they did, or however they made money, right, a tenth of that, the first tenth went to God Himself. So we can ask the question then, well, why number 10? Why not 9? Why not 11? Why not 50? Numbers always mean something in the Scriptures, so I thought this morning we also might talk about some numbers. We hear the number 7 probably the most commonly. That's always seen as a perfect number, right? God created the world in 6 days, and then on the 7th day He created recreation, right? So He created in 7 days perfectly. So it always deals with perfection, right? So when Jesus is presented with this person whose brother has sinned against him, and he says, "Do I have to forgive him 7 times?" He says, "No, you have to give him 7 times, 77 times." Or that's why they're using that number 7. Perfectly forgive them. When we have a number that means perfection, right? Number 7. If we go one less than that, number 6, it means imperfection. Up until for all of eternity, before time existed, the number 6 was actually a good number. God created man on the 6th day, and man chose to sin. All right, so that number went from meaning something good to meaning imperfect. The number 3, if we think of like a stool that has 3 legs, is perfectly balanced. It means divine perfection, right? So when we have then 3 sets of a certain number, let's say 3 sets of 666 in the book of Revelation, that's perfectly balanced imperfection. So what does the number 10 mean then? Number 10 has always meant something like total buy-in or a perfect union with God. So we hear actually the number 10 quite frequently in the Scriptures. We just don't always realize it. In the book of Genesis, God said, that phrase, God said, is said 10 times. We hear of the 10 plagues, right, to free the Israelite people from slavery. When they finally get free from slavery, God gives them 10 commandments of what it looks like to be faithful. And then we hear this quite frequently in the New Testament. Jesus oftentimes uses parables that deal with 10, right? The 10 virgins, the 10 lepers, the 10 pounds, okay? So it's always a number that deals with total buy-in. So I think we could say, like, if I'm following all 10 of the commandments, I probably believe in something. Right? If I'm only doing some of the commandments, I probably have some belief, but I'm not all bought in. I don't have total buy-in. And then we hear of the different times where we use sets of 10, right? Jesus in the desert for 40 days, 4 sets of 10. Right? He's totally bought in repeatedly on suffering for his people. So, we hear this very much as an Old Testament commandment, right, to give a tenth of what we have. And we could say, well, but Father, like, that's the Jewish people. We're Christians. Do I have to give 10%? Jesus, in the 5th chapter of Matthew's Gospel, says, I did not come to abolish the law and the prophets, I have come to fulfill them. So one could make the argument that we should actually be giving more than 10% as Christians than what the Jewish were, but we'll leave it at 10% for this morning. So we hear of this idea of total buy-in, and I think it's fair to say, right, if our treasure, right, the stuff, the income that we have is where our heart is, it would be actually very good for us psychologically to be giving the first tenth of that back to the church or back to God. So then we could be asking ourselves, where is my treasure? And am I upholding that commandment? So why is it they would give that back to support the Levites and to assist the poor? Some of it is, again, the act of being free from that. The Levites were also, every tribe had a role. The Levites were actually the priestly class. Sometimes we call it the Levitical priesthood. So they were giving it back to the temple for the priest to do the stuff. And then he would use a little bit of what was left over of the stuff, of the sacrifice, of the animals that were sacrificed, of the grain and whatnot, to live for the week. This is also the interesting part. We think of like sacrifice now at the Mass. We're like, okay, make sure everyone gets Perel before they come up. But in the Old Testament, like, they would bring live animals in and then sacrifice them on the altar. Blood everywhere. People, and then the priest would take that, we think of the sprinkling, right? The priest would take the blood of that and sprinkle the temple. Everyone left with blood on them and not their own. We're going to try that this weekend just to see how it goes, okay? I'm just teasing you. Right, so if that's what tithing really is, I think we can ask ourselves, how are we doing with that? Now, it could be the case that you say, Father, I don't want to give a full 10% to the church. Or you could say, in all honesty, Father, I don't trust you. And I don't trust what you're going to do with it. Could be a legitimate reason. God doesn't necessarily say that it has to be strictly to the church, right? I have to be giving to the poor. I have to be assisting the poor. We're very blessed in Peoria and in our area to have several things that we could be giving to. There's 2 crisis pregnancy centers downtown Peoria. Right, we have a school that's attached to our parish in a certain sense. Right, there's people in our area that probably need help. So I'm not necessarily asking you to give me your money or necessarily our parish. I hope that you believe in what's going on here. But if it's the case that you don't, it's still a commandment to give a tenth of what we have. Maybe it's the case that if you this weekend decided you're going to give a whole 10%, you wouldn't get to eat this week. I'm not asking for that quickly of a jump. Could I give 1 more percent, 0.5% more, to fulfilling what God wants? Right? He's chipping away at our hearts, at what our treasure is, to take back our hearts. This weekend, we also celebrated my favorite saint on Thursday. His name is Saint John Vianney. He was a fairly uneducated man who, just by the the recognition of his rector that he was a good man, was ordained a priest in the 1800s. And he was assigned to a very poor country parish in Ars, France, where faith had essentially died there. Nobody was going to church when he arrived. In fact, when he did arrive, the people actually threw food at him, trying to get him to leave. My welcome was a lot better than that. I just want to put that out there, okay? So he was actually disliked from the beginning. And he came in and he knew that he couldn't outsmart them. He knew that he couldn't, he wasn't filled with wisdom, but he knew that he could become a saint. And so that's what he did. He did his best in his priestly life to live without, to give to the poor, to care for those who were in his care. After just a few years, they actually had to build a railroad track to Ars, France, for the number of people who were wanting to go out there just simply to go to confession or to go to Mass. All that he could do was just simply become a saint, be detached from the world himself, so he could call others to do the same. There is a saying, there's a quote that is oftentimes attributed to St. John Vianney, but it's actually not from him. It's very pious, so they attribute it to him. And the saying is this: if a priest is a saint, his people will be holy. If a priest is holy, his people will be good. If a priest is good, his people will be fair. If a priest is fair, his people will be mediocre. And if a priest is mediocre, his people will be godless. This is a saying that was oftentimes used when I was in seminary, and it's in many ways, I say it very frequently throughout the week, reminding myself of my responsibility to become a saint. And that's the only way that I'll be a good priest for you, if I first and foremost am striving to be a saint. And it's also the case that saintliness goes in generations. Right, in the second reading, we hear of Abraham and Isaac. Isaac only knew what to do because he saw his dad do it first. Right, Isaac only knew how to be a father because he saw his dad try to do it first. If we remember the sacrifice that Abraham almost did of Isaac, they would have been well into their years of life. Abraham would have been like 100 at that point, and Isaac would have been like 30. Anyone here who's over the age of, let's just say, 60, do you think you could wrangle a young man down to tie him up to sacrifice him? Deacon, you want to try that? You want to try to wrangle me down? Isaac had to submit to it. Isaac had to say yes to what his dad was talking about. He saw in his own dad such love that when his dad said, "This is what God wants of our life," Isaac said, "Then I want what God wants for our life." Holiness and saintliness is generational. You call me father, and I have the deep responsibility of becoming a saint, so I can ask you to do the same. This week, as I was meditating on these readings and also trying to clear out my own belongings that I don't need, I had to have an honest conversation with God. Where is my heart? If I'm asking for other people to give their hearts, am I first and foremost giving my heart? Well, then where is my treasure? Because that's where my heart is. I did not come from a very wealthy family. In fact, we were just barely above poor. My sister actually is a poor person in Bloomington. It's generational oftentimes. She sometimes lives on the streets. So she spent months living in tents. And so I very much fall back on, well, what money do I have in my account? I can survive because I have this. And I realized that my heart was where my treasure is, which is where my money is. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry that that's the case in my life. So this week, as I was pondering on that, I asked myself, well, what is the exact amount I need in my account just to survive for this coming month? What if I gave the rest away? And I was scared. Could I survive on the bare essentials? And the Lord convicted my heart. I wrote a check yesterday morning to clear up my account because I put a lot of weight on what I had in my account. And I'm very sorry about that I was holding back so much, asking something of you that I wasn't yet living up to. This weekend, I'll put in the collection a check for $9,000 and hope that nothing breaks this week. Where's your heart at? It's probably where your treasure is.